I still remember the night I told him the truth. The words hung in the air between us like a confession that had been building for years, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely exposed. My hands were shaking as I looked into his eyes, knowing that everything was about to change. The lie I'd been living was finally crumbling, and there was no going back. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. My name is David, and for 23 years, I had perfected the art of being someone I wasn't. I had girlfriends whose names I dropped casually in conversations, stories about romantic dinners that never quite felt right, and a carefully constructed image of heterosexuality that everyone around me believed without question. I was the guy who talked about attractive women with my friends, who nodded along when they discussed their latest conquests, who played the part so well that sometimes I almost believed it myself. But then there was Jake. Jake Martinez had been in my life since college, orbiting around the edges of my friend group like a gravitational force I couldn't ignore. He was the kind of person who commanded attention without trying, with dark hair that always looked slightly messy in the most appealing way, and eyes that seemed to see straight through whatever facade you were presenting to the world. When he laughed, really laughed, his whole face transformed, and I found myself saying stupid things just to see that expression again. The problem was that Jake was also my best friend Marcus's younger brother, which meant he was off limits in about 17 different ways. Marcus had been my roommate junior year, my workout partner, my wingman at bars where I pretended to be interested in the women who approached us. He trusted me completely, and that trust felt like a weight on my chest every time I caught myself staring at Jake a little too long during family barbecues or group hangouts. I told myself it was just admiration. Jake was studying architecture, and there was something captivating about the way he talked about buildings and spaces, his hands moving as he described the flow of light through windows or the way a staircase could change the entire feeling of a room. I convinced myself that I was interested in his passion, not in the way his fingers traced invisible blueprints in the air, or how his voice got softer and more intense when he was really excited about something. The first crack in my carefully constructed wall happened on a Thursday night in October. Marcus had invited a bunch of us over to his apartment to watch some football game that I honestly couldn't have cared less about, but I went because that's what straight guys did, right? They watched sports and drank beer and made comments about the cheerleaders. Jake showed up late, still wearing his work clothes from his internship at some downtown firm. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie loosened, and there was a smudge of graphite on his left hand that suggested he'd been sketching during his lunch break. He collapsed onto the couch next to me with a groan, close enough that I could smell his cologne mixed with coffee and something else that was just distinctly him. "Long day?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual while hyper-aware of the warmth radiating from his body. "The longest," he said, letting his head fall back against the cushions. My supervisor had me redesigning the same lobby layout 6 times because the client couldn't decide if they wanted modern minimalist or contemporary sophisticated, which apparently are completely different things. I laughed, and he turned his head to look at me, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You think that's funny?" "I think you're funny," I said without thinking, and then immediately felt heat rise in my cheeks. "I mean, the way you tell stories. You make everything sound like this epic battle between good design and corporate stupidity." His smile widened, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. The sounds of the game and our friends' commentary faded into background noise, and I felt like we were in our own little bubble of understanding. Then Marcus threw a handful of popcorn at us, yelling something about paying attention to the game, and the moment shattered. But something had shifted. I started noticing things I'd been trying not to see. The way Jake's eyes crinkled when he was genuinely amused versus when he was just being polite. How he had a habit of running his hand through his hair when he was thinking hard about something. The fact that he always seemed to end up sitting next to me during group activities, even when there were other empty seats available. I began finding excuses to text him. Nothing obvious, just casual messages about things I thought he'd find interesting. A photo of an interesting building I'd passed on my way to work. A link to an article about sustainable architecture. A meme about the struggles of creative professionals that made me think of his lobby redesign saga. He always responded quickly, often with more enthusiasm than the messages probably warranted, and our conversations started extending long into the night. The second crack came 3 weeks later, during Marcus's birthday party. We'd all gone out to this bar downtown, the kind of place with exposed brick walls and craft cocktails that cost too much, but tasted like they were worth it. I was nursing my second beer, trying to look interested in a conversation about fantasy football standings, when I felt someone slide into the booth next to me. "You look like you're having about as much fun as I am," Jake said, his shoulder brushing against mine as he settled in. "Is it that obvious?" I asked, grateful for the excuse to turn away from the sports discussion. Only to someone who's also pretending to care about whether Thompson's knee injury is going to affect his rushing yards this season. Jake took a sip of what looked like whiskey, neat, and made a face. "God, that's terrible. Why did I order this?" "Because you wanted to look sophisticated and adult," I suggested, stealing the glass from his hand and taking a sip myself. He was right. It was terrible, harsh and burning in a way that made my eyes water. "Yeah, that's awful. Want to get something that actually tastes good?" We ended up at the bar, standing closer together than strictly necessary while we waited for the bartender's attention. The music was loud enough that we had to lean in to hear each other, and I found myself getting distracted by the way Jake's lips moved when he talked, the way he gestured with his hands even in the limited space we had. "Can I ask you something?" he said during a lull in the conversation, his voice serious enough that I felt my stomach tighten with anxiety. "Sure. Are you happy?" The question caught me completely off guard, and I must have looked as confused as I felt because he quickly added, "I mean, you just seem like you're going through the motions sometimes. Like you're performing being yourself instead of actually being yourself, if that makes sense." It made perfect sense, and that terrified me. "I don't know what you mean," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew they sounded hollow. Jake studied my face for a long moment, and I felt like he was reading something there that I'd been trying to keep hidden. "Okay," he said finally, but his tone suggested he didn't believe me at all. "Just know that if you ever want to talk about anything, I'm here. No judgment." The bartender chose that moment to appear, and we ordered our drinks, something fruity and complicated for Jake, a simple beer for me. But the conversation stayed with me for the rest of the night. Every time I caught Jake looking at me, I wondered what he saw, what he suspected, whether my carefully maintained facade was as transparent as it suddenly felt. Things got more complicated after that. Jake started showing up at places where he knew I'd be, always with a perfectly reasonable excuse. He needed to drop something off for Marcus. He was in the neighborhood. He thought I might want to see this new coffee shop that had opened up near my office. Each interaction felt charged with something I couldn't name, a tension that made my heart race and my palms sweat. The third crack happened on a Saturday afternoon in November. I'd been at the gym, working out my frustrations on the weight machines, when my phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Want to see something cool? I'm at the Riverside building on 5th Street. Top floor." I should have said no. I should have made up an excuse about being busy or tired or having other plans. Instead, I found myself driving across town, taking the elevator to the 15th floor of a building I'd never been in before, following Jake's directions to a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." Jake was waiting for me on the other side, grinning like he was about to show me the best secret in the world. "Come on," he said, leading me through a maze of construction equipment and plastic sheeting. "Trust me, it's worth it." We climbed a narrow staircase that led to the roof, and when Jake pushed open the heavy door at the top, I understood why he'd wanted me to see this. The entire city spread out below us, golden in the late afternoon light, buildings stretching toward the horizon like an architectural symphony. The wind was cold and sharp, but the view was breathtaking. "The building's not finished yet," Jake explained, moving to stand at the edge of the roof. "But the developer is a friend of my supervisor's, and he said I could come up here to take some reference photos. I thought you might appreciate it." "It's incredible," I said, and meant it. But I wasn't just talking about the view. I was watching Jake as he pointed out different landmarks, his face animated with enthusiasm, his hair whipping around in the wind. He looked so alive, so genuinely himself, and I felt that familiar ache in my chest that I'd been trying to ignore for months. There's something about being up this high, Jake continued, his voice softer now. It makes everything else seem smaller, less important. Like all the stuff we worry about on the ground level doesn't really matter when you can see the whole picture. I knew he was talking about architecture, about perspective and design principles, but his words hit me in a completely different way. Standing there with him, looking out over the city, I felt like I could see my own life from a new angle. All the lies I'd been telling, all the energy I'd been putting into being someone I wasn't, all the fear that had been driving my decisions. It all seemed so small and manageable from up here. Jake, I started, not sure what I was going to say, but feeling like I needed to say something. He turned to look at me, and the expression on his face was so open, so expectant, that I almost told him everything right then. Almost confessed that I'd never been attracted to any of the women I'd claimed to date, that I thought about him more than I should, that I was tired of pretending to be someone I wasn't. Instead, I chickened out. Thanks for showing me this. It's really beautiful. Something flickered across his face, disappointment, maybe, or frustration, but he just nodded. Yeah, it is. We stayed up there for another hour, talking about everything and nothing, and I tried to memorize the way he looked with the city lights starting to twinkle behind him, the way his laugh carried on the wind, the way he made me feel like the most interesting person in the world when he listened to me talk. The fourth crack came 2 weeks later at Marcus's apartment again. We were all supposed to be having a casual game night, but it had devolved into the usual pattern of everyone splitting off into smaller conversations. I was in the kitchen, refilling my drink, when Jake appeared beside me. Can we talk? He asked, his voice low and serious. Privately, my heart started pounding, but I nodded, following him out onto Marcus's small balcony. The November air was cold enough that I could see my breath, but Jake didn't seem to notice. He was pacing in the small space, running his hands through his hair in that way that meant he was working up to something important. I need to ask you something, he said finally, stopping to face me. And I need you to be honest with me. Okay. I managed, though my throat felt tight. Are you gay? The question hit me like a physical blow. I felt all the air leave my lungs, felt the careful walls I'd built around myself start to crumble. What? No, I'm not. Why would you? David. His voice was gentle but firm. I've been watching you for months. The way you react when people talk about women, the way you never seem genuinely interested in any of the girls who are obviously interested in you. The way you look at me sometimes. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, but even I could hear how unconvincing I sounded. Jake stepped closer, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. I think you do, and I think you're scared, which I understand. But I also think you're tired of pretending. I wanted to deny it again, to laugh it off and change the subject, to retreat back into the safety of my carefully constructed lies. But standing there on that balcony, with Jake looking at me like he could see straight through to my soul, I found that I couldn't. The words just wouldn't come. I can't, I whispered instead, and it was the closest thing to the truth I'd spoken in years. Can't what? Jake asked softly. Can't be that person. Can't disappoint everyone. Can't risk losing everything I've built. What if you gain something better instead? The question hung between us and the cold air, and I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into an abyss that might be freedom or might be destruction. Before I could figure out how to answer, the sliding door opened behind us, and Marcus stuck his head out. Hey, you guys okay out here? It's freezing. Yeah, we're good, Jake said, not taking his eyes off me. Just getting some air. We went back inside, but everything felt different. I was hyper-aware of Jake's presence for the rest of the night, of the way he kept glancing at me when he thought no one else was looking, of the unfinished conversation hanging between us like a bridge I was too scared to cross. The weeks that followed were torture. Jake didn't push, didn't bring up our conversation on the balcony, but there was a new tension between us that made every interaction feel loaded with meaning. When he texted me, I found myself reading and rereading his messages, looking for hidden meanings. When we were in the same room, I was constantly aware of where he was, what he was doing, whether he was watching me. I started avoiding group gatherings, making excuses about work or being tired or having other plans. It was easier than sitting there pretending everything was normal while feeling like I was going to explode from the pressure of keeping my secret. But Jake noticed my absence, and that somehow made everything worse. David's been weird lately. I heard Marcus say to someone at a party I'd skipped. I was only there because Jake had specifically asked me to come, and I hadn't been able to think of a good enough excuse. He keeps bailing on stuff. I'm starting to think he's got a secret girlfriend or something. The irony of that statement would have been funny if it hadn't made me feel like I was going to throw up. I excused myself to the bathroom and spent 10 minutes staring at myself in the mirror, trying to figure out how much longer I could keep this up. When I came out, Jake was waiting in the hallway. "We need to talk," he said, and it wasn't a request. "Jake, I can't." "Yes, you can. And you need to, because this is killing you. I can see it." He was right, and we both knew it. I'd lost weight over the past few weeks, had dark circles under my eyes from nights spent lying awake staring at the ceiling, had been snapping at coworkers and friends over stupid things because I felt like I was going to crawl out of my own skin. "Not here," I said finally. "My place. Tomorrow night. 7 o'clock. I wanted to say no, to make up another excuse, to keep running from the conversation that felt inevitable. But I was so tired of running, so tired of pretending, so tired of being afraid of my own feelings. "Okay," I whispered. Jake's apartment was exactly what I'd expected. Clean lines, interesting art on the walls, furniture that looked like it belonged in a design magazine, but still managed to feel comfortable and lived in. He offered me a beer, which I accepted gratefully, needing something to do with my hands. We sat on his couch, not quite touching but close enough that I could feel the heat from his body. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. I stared at my beer bottle, picking at the label, while Jake waited with the kind of patience that somehow made me feel even more anxious. "I don't know how to do this," I said finally. "Do what?" "Be honest. Be myself. I've been pretending for so long that I'm not sure I remember who I really am underneath all the lies." Jake set his beer down on the coffee table and turned to face me fully. "Start with something small. Something true." I took a shaky breath. "I've never been in love with a woman." "Okay. What else?" "I think about you more than I should." The words came out in a rush, like I was afraid that if I didn't say them quickly, I'd lose my nerve entirely. "I think about what it would be like to kiss you, to hold your hand, to wake up next to you. And it scares the hell out of me because you're Marcus's brother and because I've spent my entire adult life convincing everyone, including myself, that I was something I'm not." Jake was quiet for a long moment, and I felt panic rising in my chest. I'd said too much, revealed too much, ruined everything. I started to stand up, to make some excuse about needing to leave, but Jake's hand on my arm stopped me. "David," he said softly, "look at me." I forced myself to meet his eyes, expecting to see pity or discomfort or rejection. Instead, I saw something that looked like relief. "I've been waiting for you to say that for months," he said. "I was starting to think I was imagining the way you looked at me, the way you seemed to light up when I walked into a room. I was starting to think I was projecting my own feelings onto you." "Your own feelings?" I repeated, not sure I'd heard him correctly. Jake smiled, and it was soft and vulnerable and beautiful. "I've had a crush on you since college, David. Since the first time Marcus brought you home for Thanksgiving, and you spent the entire evening asking me about my architecture program like it was the most fascinating thing you'd ever heard. I thought you were straight, obviously, but I couldn't help hoping that maybe, someday, you'd figure out that you weren't." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "You've liked me for 3 years? Longer than that, if I'm being completely honest. But 3 years of actually knowing you, of watching you be kind and funny and brilliant, of falling a little bit more in love with you every time we talked." He paused, his cheeks flushing slightly. "Sorry, that probably sounds pathetic." "It doesn't sound pathetic," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It sounds like the most beautiful thing anyone's ever said to me." We looked at each other for a long moment, and I felt like something fundamental was shifting between us, like we were finally acknowledging something that had been building for years. The air felt charged, electric, full of possibility and terror in equal measure. "What happens now?" I asked. "That's up to you," Jake said. I'm not going to pressure you into anything you're not ready for. If you need time to figure things out, I understand. If you want to pretend this conversation never happened, I'll respect that. But if you want to explore this, whatever this is between us, I'm here. I thought about all the reasons I should say no, should retreat back into the safety of my lies. I thought about Marcus, about my family, about my coworkers and friends, and everyone who knew me as the straight guy who dated women and talked about sports. I thought about how much easier it would be to keep pretending, to keep living the life I'd built even if it felt like wearing clothes that didn't fit. But then I looked at Jake, really looked at him, and I thought about what he'd said on the rooftop about perspective, about how things look different when you could see the whole picture. From up here, in this moment of honesty, all my fears seemed smaller, more manageable. The possibility of being genuinely happy, of being with someone who saw me and wanted me exactly as I was, seemed worth the risk. I want to try, I said, the words coming out stronger than I'd expected them to. I'm terrified, and I have no idea what I'm doing, but I want to try. Jake's smile was radiant. We can figure it out together. He reached for my hand, threading our fingers together, and I felt something inside me settle, like a puzzle piece finally clicking into place. His hand was warm and slightly calloused from his work, and holding it felt both completely natural and thrillingly new. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, and the question sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with nervousness and everything to do with want. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and Jake leaned in slowly, giving me time to change my mind, to pull away, to retreat back into fear. But I didn't want to retreat anymore. I wanted this, wanted him, wanted to finally stop running from who I really was. When his lips touched mine, it was like coming home and going on an adventure at the same time. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, but when I responded, when I let myself lean into him and kiss him back, it deepened into something that made my head spin and my heart race. He tasted like beer and something sweet, and when he made a small sound of pleasure against my mouth, I felt like I might melt into the couch. We broke apart eventually, breathing hard, and I rested my forehead against his, trying to process the fact that I'd just had my first kiss with a man, that it had been everything I'd dreamed it would be and more. "Wow," I said, because my brain seemed to have short-circuited, and that was the only word I could manage. Jake laughed, the sound warm and delighted. "Good wow or bad wow?" "Definitely good wow. Really, really good wow." We spent the rest of the evening talking, really talking, in a way I'd never been able to with anyone before. Jake told me about his own journey of self-discovery, about coming out to his family in college, about the relationships he'd had that had taught him what he wanted and what he didn't. I told him about the years of confusion and denial, about the women I'd dated while feeling like I was playing a role, about the loneliness of keeping such a fundamental part of myself hidden. "It's going to be complicated," Jake said as the night got later and we found ourselves curled up together on his couch, my head on his shoulder, his fingers running through my hair. "Marcus is going to have questions. Your family, your friends, everyone who knows you as straight David is going to need time to adjust." "I know," I said, and I did know, but somehow it didn't seem as terrifying as it had before. "But I'm tired of living a lie. I'm tired of being afraid of my own feelings. And I'm tired of pretending I don't want to be with you." Jake pressed a kiss to the top of my head. "We'll take it slow, one step at a time. There's no rush." But even as he said it, I felt like I'd been rushing toward this moment my entire life, like every choice I'd made, every lie I'd told, every moment of fear and confusion had been leading me here, to this couch, to this man, to this version of myself that finally felt real. I stayed the night, and waking up next to Jake the next morning was a revelation. He looked younger in his sleep, his face relaxed and peaceful, and I spent a few minutes just watching him breathe, marveling at the fact that this was real, that I was allowed to be here, that I didn't have to pretend anymore. When he woke up and smiled at me, sleepy and beautiful, I felt something click into place that I hadn't even realized was broken. The next few weeks were like living in a bubble of secret happiness. Jake and I started spending more time together, always with plausible excuses. He was helping me pick out furniture for my apartment, I was helping him with a project, We'd run into each other at the coffee shop and decided to hang out. To everyone else, we probably just looked like friends getting closer, but every moment felt charged with the electricity of our secret. We were careful not to be too obvious, not to touch in ways that might give us away, but there were small moments that felt huge to me. Jake's hand brushing against mine when he passed me a cup of coffee. The way he'd find excuses to sit next to me during group activities. The private smiles we'd share across crowded rooms that felt like our own secret language. The hardest part was being around Marcus. My best friend was completely oblivious to what was happening between his brother and me, which made me feel guilty and grateful in equal measure. Guilty because I was keeping something huge from him, grateful because I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. I needed time to figure out who I was in this new reality before I had to explain it to anyone else. Jake was incredibly patient with my need to take things slow. We'd kissed several more times, each one better than the last, but he never pushed for more than I was ready to give. When I told him I'd never been with a man before, that I was nervous about the physical aspects of our relationship, he just held me and told me we had all the time in the world. "There's no timeline," he said one evening as we lay on his couch, watching a movie that neither of us was really paying attention to. "We do this at whatever pace feels right for you." "What if I'm terrible at it?" I asked, voicing one of my biggest fears. "What if I don't know what I'm doing?" Jake turned to look at me, his expression serious. "David, you're not terrible at anything. And even if you were, which you won't be, we'd figure it out together. That's what people who care about each other do. People who care about each other." He hadn't said love yet, and neither had I, but the word hung in the air between us, unspoken but understood. I was falling in love with Jake Martinez, and the terrifying, wonderful truth was that I was pretty sure he was falling in love with me too. The bubble burst on a Tuesday night in December. I was at Marcus's apartment, helping him put up Christmas decorations, when Jake walked in from work looking frustrated and exhausted. "Rough day?" Marcus asked, not looking up from the string of lights he was trying to untangle. "The worst," Jake said, dropping his bag by the door and running his hands through his hair. "The client rejected our latest design proposal. My supervisor is being a complete ass about the revisions, and I spilled coffee all over my presentation boards this morning." "That sucks, man," Marcus said sympathetically. "Want a beer?" "God, yes." I watched Jake collapse into the chair across from me, and I could see the tension in his shoulders, the frustration in the set of his jaw. I wanted to go to him, to massage the stress from his neck, to kiss him until he forgot about his terrible day. Instead, I sat there, playing the role of his brother's friend, feeling helpless and useless. "I might have something that'll cheer you up," Marcus said, returning from the kitchen with 3 beers. "David's finally going to ask out that girl from his office. What's her name again?" "Sarah." My blood turned to ice. I'd forgotten about Sarah, about the lie I'd told Marcus weeks ago when he'd been pestering me about my love life. I'd made up some story about a coworker I was interested in, thinking it would buy me time and get him off my back. I'd never imagined it would come back to haunt me like this. Actually, I started scrambling for a way out of this conversation, but Marcus wasn't done. "Come on, don't be modest. You've been talking about her for weeks. Jake, you should see the way David lights up when he mentions her. It's like he's a completely different person." I risked a glance at Jake and immediately wished I hadn't. The expression on his face was carefully neutral, but I could see the hurt in his eyes, the confusion, the betrayal. He thought I'd been lying to him, stringing him along while pursuing someone else. The truth was so much more complicated, but I couldn't explain it, not with Marcus sitting right there, beaming at me like he was proud of my fictional romantic prospects. "That's great, David," Jake said, his voice flat. "I hope it works out for you." The rest of the evening was torture. Jake barely spoke to me, and when he did, his tone was polite but distant. Marcus didn't notice anything was wrong, chattering away about Christmas plans and work gossip, but I felt like I was drowning in the space between what I wanted to say and what I was allowed to say. When I finally left Marcus's apartment, Jake followed me out to the parking lot. "We need to talk," he said, and his voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. "Jake, I can explain." "Can you?" "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been playing games with me." leading me on while you're actually interested in some woman from your office. That's not what's happening, I said desperately. Sarah isn't real. I made her up to get Marcus off my back about my love life. I never expected him to bring it up in front of you. Jake stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him trying to decide whether to believe me. You made her up? Yes, completely. I've never even talked to a woman named Sarah, let alone been interested in dating one. Some of the tension left his shoulders, but he still looked hurt and frustrated. Then why didn't you just tell Marcus the truth? Because I'm not ready, I said, the words coming out more forcefully than I'd intended. Because this is all new to me, and I'm still figuring it out, and I need time before I have to deal with everyone's reactions and questions and opinions. How much time, David? Because I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending we're just friends while you're pretending to be interested in imaginary women. It's killing me. The pain in his voice broke something inside me. I'd been so focused on my own fear, my own need to control the pace of my coming out, that I hadn't really considered what this was doing to him. He'd been out for years, had already done the hard work of accepting himself and building a life as an openly gay man. Being with me meant going back into the closet in some ways, hiding his feelings, pretending our relationship was something it wasn't. I'm sorry, I said, stepping closer to him. I'm so sorry. I know this is hard for you too, and I know I'm asking a lot. I just need a little more time to figure out how to tell people, starting with Marcus. You seem like a completely different person than you were a year ago, she said. More confident, more yourself. It's wonderful to see. She was right. I did feel like a different person, or rather, like the person I'd always been underneath but had been too afraid to show the world. The constant anxiety of maintaining a false identity was gone, replaced by the peace that came from being genuinely known and loved. Jake and I started talking seriously about wedding plans, about when and where we wanted to get married, what kind of ceremony we wanted to have. We both agreed that we wanted something relatively small and intimate, focused on the people who mattered most to us rather than a big production. I want Marcus to be my best man, I told Jake one evening as we looked through wedding magazines. Is that weird, since he's your brother? It's perfect, Jake said. He's been your best friend longer than he's been my brother-in-law to be. And honestly, I think he'd be hurt if you asked anyone else. We decided on a spring wedding, about 18 months away, which would give us time to save money and plan properly. Jake wanted to design our wedding invitations himself, incorporating architectural elements that represented the building where we'd had our first real conversation about our feelings. I love the idea of our love story being literally built into our wedding stationery. As winter settled in, we established new traditions together. Sunday morning coffee in bed, reading the paper, and planning our week. Friday night movie marathons, taking turns picking films, and making increasingly elaborate snacks. Weekend trips to visit family, splitting time between my parents and his so everyone felt included in our life together. One particularly cold Saturday in January, we were at Jake's parents' house for dinner when his mother pulled out photo albums from his childhood. I'd seen some of these pictures before, but looking at them now, as his fiancé rather than just his brother's friend, felt different. He was such a serious little boy, his mother said, pointing to a picture of 5-year-old Jake building an elaborate castle out of blocks. Always constructing something, always thinking about how things fit together. Some things never change, I said, watching Jake's face as he looked at the photos. He still thinks about how things fit together, including us. Jake's father, who'd been quiet for most of the evening, looked up at that. You two do fit together well, he said. It's nice to see Jake so happy. We worried about him for a while. Thought he might never find someone who appreciated all his quirks. I love his quirks, I said, meaning it completely. They're part of what makes him perfect for me. Later that night, as we drove home through the snowy streets, Jake was unusually quiet. What are you thinking about? I asked. Just family stuff, he said. How much things have changed in the past year. How different everything feels now that we're engaged. Now that everyone knows we're serious about each other. Good different or bad different? Good different. Really good different. It's just sometimes I can't believe this is real, that I get to have this with you. I reached over and took his hand, careful not to interfere with his driving. It's real. We're real. And we're going to keep being real for the next 60 years or so. Jake laughed. Only 60 years. Fine, 70. But that's my final offer. Deal, he said, bringing my hand to his lips to kiss my knuckles. Spring arrived gradually that year, with tentative warm days mixed in with late winter cold snaps. Jake and I started looking for a new apartment, something bigger that could accommodate our growing collection of furniture and books and the life we were building together. We wanted a place that felt like ours from the beginning, rather than the apartment we'd moved into out of convenience. We found the perfect place in March, a 2-bedroom unit in a converted warehouse, with high ceilings and huge windows that Jake fell in love with immediately. The second bedroom would be Jake's home office, where he could work on freelance projects and spread out his drawings without taking over the entire living space. This is it, he said the moment we walked in. This is our home. He was right. The space felt like us somehow, modern but warm, open but intimate. We put in an application that day and spent the next week anxiously waiting to hear if we'd gotten it. When the landlord called to tell us the apartment was ours, Jake picked me up and spun me around the kitchen of our old place, both of us laughing with excitement and relief. We're really doing this, I said when he put me down. We're really building a life together. Best life ever, Jake said, kissing me soundly. Moving day was chaos, but the good kind of chaos that comes from starting a new chapter. Marcus enlisted several of our friends to help with the heavy lifting, and by the end of the day, our new apartment was filled with boxes and furniture and the promise of the home we were going to create together. That night, we ordered pizza and sat on the floor of our empty living room, surrounded by boxes, but happy beyond measure. To new beginnings, Jake said, raising his beer bottle in a toast. To telling the truth, I countered. To both, we said together and clinked our bottles. As we unpacked over the next few weeks, I was struck by how seamlessly our lives had blended together. Jake's architectural books mixed with my novels on the shelves. His modern furniture complemented my more traditional pieces. His coffee mug sat next to mine in the kitchen cabinets, and our clothes hung together in the bedroom closet. Look at us, I said one evening as we cooked dinner together in our new kitchen. We're like a real couple. We are a real couple, Jake said, bumping my shoulder with his. The realest. He was right, of course. We were real in a way that none of my previous relationships had ever been, because this was the first relationship I'd ever had where I was completely myself. There was no performance, no pretending, no carefully maintained facade. Just me and Jake, exactly as we were, building something beautiful together. Summer brought new routines and new adventures. We joined a softball league for LGBTQ+ professionals, where I discovered I was terrible at sports but excellent at cheering for Jake, who turned out to be surprisingly good at shortstop. We started hosting dinner parties in our new apartment, bringing together friends from different parts of our lives and watching them become friends with each other. You're good at this, Marcus told me after one particularly successful gathering where everyone had stayed until nearly midnight, talking and laughing around our dining room table. At bringing people together, making everyone feel welcome. I learned from watching you, I said. All those parties at your place where you made sure everyone was included, everyone was having fun. I just never felt like I could really participate before because I was too busy pretending to be someone else. Well, definitely not pretending anymore, Marcus said, glancing over at Jake, who was telling an animated story to a group of our friends. You two are disgustingly happy together. The most disgusting, I agreed cheerfully. One evening in late July, Jake and I were walking home from dinner when we passed a group of teenagers who were clearly struggling with something. They were huddled together on a bench, and I could see that one of them was crying. Should we check on them? I asked Jake. I think so, he said. We approached carefully, not wanting to intrude, but when the crying teenager looked up, I could see the fear and confusion in his eyes that I remembered so well from my own teenage years. Are you guys okay? Jake asked gently. Not really, one of the other teenagers said. Our friend just came out to his parents, and it didn't go well. They kicked him out. My heart broke for the kid, remembering my own fear about how my parents would react, how lucky I'd been that they'd been supportive. Is there somewhere safe you can stay tonight? I asked the boy who'd been crying. He shook his head, looking lost and scared. Jake and I exchanged a look, and I knew we were thinking the same thing. We couldn't just walk away from this. There's a youth center downtown that helps LGBTQ+ kids in situations like this, Jake said, pulling out his phone. Let me call them and see what resources they have available. While Jake made the call, I sat down next to the scared teenager. What's your name? I asked. Tyler, he said quietly. Tyler, I'm David. I know this feels like the end of the world right now, but I promise you it gets better. I came out when I was 23, and I was terrified that everyone would reject me. Some people did, but the people who really mattered, the people who really loved me, they stayed. But what if my parents never accept me? Tyler asked, fresh tears starting to fall. Then that's their loss, I said firmly. And their failure, not yours. You deserve to be loved exactly as you are, Tyler. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Jake finished his call and came back over to us. Good news, he said. The youth center has emergency housing available, and they can send someone to pick you up. They'll also connect you with counseling services and help you figure out next steps. The relief on Tyler's face was palpable. Thank you, he said. Both of you. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stopped. We've all been where you are, I said. The LGBTQ+ community takes care of each other. We stayed with the teenagers until the youth center van arrived, and I gave Tyler my phone number, telling him to call if he ever needed someone to talk to who understood what he was going through. As we walked home, Jake was quiet, thoughtful. What are you thinking about? I asked. Just how different that could have been if we'd walked past, he said. How easy it would have been to assume someone else would help, or that it wasn't our problem. But we didn't walk past. No, we didn't. And I'm proud of us for that. I was proud of us too. A year ago, I would have been too wrapped up in my own fear and confusion to reach out to someone else who was struggling. But being secure in my own identity, being loved and supported by Jake and our community, had given me the confidence and stability to help others. I want to do more of that, I said. I want to get more involved with organizations that help LGBTQ+ youth. Me too, Jake said. We could volunteer together. And we did. We started volunteering with the same youth center that had helped Tyler, mentoring teenagers who were struggling with coming out or dealing with family rejection. It was hard work, emotionally demanding, but also incredibly rewarding. Helping other people navigate their own journeys of self-discovery gave me perspective on how far I'd come and reminded me why it was so important to live authentically. Tyler became a regular at the youth center, and over the months that followed, I watched him transform from a scared, confused kid into a confident young man who was proud of who he was. His parents eventually came around, with the help of family counseling, and seeing their reunion reminded me how fortunate I'd been to have supportive family from the beginning. You saved my life, Tyler told me one evening after a group session. If you and Jake hadn't stopped that night, I don't know what would have happened to me. You saved your own life, I corrected him. By being brave enough to tell the truth about who you are, even when it was scary. Jake and I just helped you find the resources you needed. Still, Tyler said, thank you for showing me that it's possible to be gay and happy and have a life worth living. His words stayed with me as Jake and I drove home that night. It was possible to be gay and happy and have a life worth living. I was living proof of that, and so was Jake. And so were all the other LGBTQ+ people we'd met through our volunteer work who had found love and acceptance in community. Fall arrived with its usual burst of color, and with it came the realization that Jake and I had been engaged for almost a year. Our wedding was still several months away, but we started making concrete plans, booking vendors, sending save the dates to family and friends. I can't wait to marry you, Jake told me one evening as we addressed wedding invitations at our dining room table. Even though I'm terrible at addressing envelopes, I asked, looking at my decidedly non-calligraphic handwriting. Especially because you're terrible at addressing envelopes, Jake said, kissing my temple. I love all your imperfections. Lucky for me, since I have so many of them. You have exactly the right number of imperfections, Jake said seriously. Any fewer, and you'd be boring. Any more, and you'd be someone else entirely. I looked at him, this man who loved me so completely, who had seen me at my most scared and confused, and had chosen to stay, who had been patient with my journey and supportive of my growth, who made me want to be the best version of myself every single day. "I love you," I said, setting down my pen and turning to face him fully. "I love you too," he said. "Always." Winter returned with a vengeance that year, bringing snowstorms and ice and the kind of cold that made you question why anyone chose to live in a climate with actual seasons. But our apartment was warm and cozy, filled with the glow of string lights and the smell of whatever elaborate dinner Jake was experimenting with in the kitchen. 3 more months, Jake said one snowy evening in February as we looked at our wedding planning checklist. 3 more months until I get to call you my husband, I said, still amazed by how natural that word felt now. 3 more months until everyone has to stop asking us when we're getting married, Jake said with a laugh. 3 more months until we can stop addressing wedding invitations and planning seating charts and tasting cake samples. Hey, I like the cake samples. You liked eating cake. There's a difference. Jake grinned. Guilty as charged. We decided on a ceremony at the Botanical Gardens, surrounded by spring flowers and natural beauty, with a reception at a nearby restaurant that specialized in farm-to-table cuisine. The guest list was small but meaningful: family, close friends, and a few of the teenagers from the youth center who had become important parts of our extended chosen family. "Are you nervous?" Jake asked as we finalized the last few details. "About the wedding?" "No. About being married to you?" "Never." "Good answer," Jake said, pulling me into his arms. "Because you're stuck with me now." "Promise?" I asked, echoing the conversation we'd had on the rooftop more than a year ago. "Promise," Jake said, and kissed me like he meant it. The weeks leading up to the wedding flew by in a blur of final preparations and growing excitement. My parents threw us an engagement party, Jake's parents hosted a rehearsal dinner, and Marcus organized a bachelor party that was equal parts embarrassing and wonderful. "I can't believe you're actually getting married," Marcus said during his best man speech at the bachelor party. "I mean, I can believe Jake's getting married. He's been ready to settle down since he was 12. But David, you've spent the last 5 years convincing me you were the world's most commitment-phobic straight guy." Everyone laughed, including me. It was funny how different my life looked from the outside now, how the narrative had changed completely once I started living honestly. "Turns out I wasn't commitment-phobic," I said when Marcus handed me the microphone. "I was just waiting for the right person. And I wasn't straight, I was just really, really confused." More laughter, but also nods of understanding from the friends who had watched my journey over the past 2 years. "Jake," I continued, looking at my fiancé across the room, "thank you for being patient with my confusion. Thank you for seeing who I really was before I could see it myself. Thank you for loving me enough to wait for me to catch up." Jake's eyes were bright with unshed tears, and I felt my own throat tighten with emotion. "I can't wait to marry you," I finished. "I can't wait to spend the rest of my life being completely, honestly, authentically myself with you." The room erupted in cheers and applause, and Jake crossed the room to kiss me, not caring that we were surrounded by all our friends, not caring about anything except expressing the love that had brought us to this moment. The night before the wedding, I stayed at my parents' house while Jake stayed at his apartment with Marcus. It felt strange to sleep apart after so many months of sharing a bed, but there was something sweet about the tradition, about the anticipation of seeing each other at the altar. I lay awake for a long time that night, thinking about the journey that had brought me here. 2 years ago, I had been living a lie, pretending to be someone I wasn't, terrified of my own feelings and desires. Now I was hours away from marrying the love of my life, surrounded by family and friends who knew and accepted exactly who I was. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been moments of fear and doubt, relationships that had been strained or lost, conversations that had been painful but necessary. But every difficult moment had been worth it to get to this place of authenticity and love. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Can't sleep. Too excited to marry you tomorrow." I smiled and typed back, "Same. I love you. I love you too. See you at the altar." Wouldn't miss it for the world. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, with the kind of perfect spring weather that made everything feel possible. I woke up feeling calm and excited, ready to marry Jake, ready to start this new chapter of our life together. My parents made me breakfast, and we sat around the kitchen table talking about everything and nothing, the conversation easy and comfortable. My dad, who had always been a man of few words, surprised me by getting emotional as I got ready to leave for the venue. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice thick with feeling. "Not just for finding love, but for having the courage to be yourself. That takes real strength." "Thanks, Dad," I said, hugging him tightly. "That means everything to me." At the botanical gardens, everything was perfect. The flowers were in full bloom, the weather was gorgeous, and our families and friends were gathered to celebrate with us. I stood at the altar with Marcus beside me as my best man, watching the entrance for my first glimpse of Jake. When the music started and Jake appeared at the end of the aisle, my breath caught in my throat. He looked incredible in his navy suit, his hair perfectly styled, his face glowing with happiness. But more than that, he looked like home. He looked like my future, my partner, my person. As he walked toward me, I thought about all the moments that had led us here. The first time I'd noticed him at a college party. The night on the rooftop, when I'd almost told him how I felt. The evening in his apartment, when I'd finally been brave enough to tell the truth. The promise ring and the proposal and all the small, daily moments of love and support that had built the foundation of our relationship. When Jake reached the altar and took my hands, I felt complete in a way I'd never experienced before. "Hi," he whispered just for me. "Hi yourself," I whispered back. The ceremony was beautiful, filled with personal vows that made everyone cry and readings from friends and family that celebrated love in all its forms. When the officiant pronounced us married and told us we could kiss, Jake and I came together like we were the only two people in the world. "I love you, husband," Jake murmured against my lips. "I love you too, husband," I replied, and the word felt like magic. The reception was everything we dreamed it would be: intimate, joyful, filled with the people who mattered most to us. I tried to imagine our future, our children grown and successful, possibly with families of their own, Jake and I older, but still deeply in love, still supporting each other's dreams, still grateful for the journey that had brought us together. "I can't wait to find out," I said. "Me neither," Jake agreed, closing the photo album and pulling me closer to him on the couch. "But for now, I'm perfectly happy with exactly where we are. No regrets." I asked, our traditional question. "None," Jake said firmly. "Not a single one. Every choice we made, every risk we took, every moment of fear we pushed through, it all led us here, to this life, to this love, to this family." "I love you," I said, the words as true and powerful as they'd been the first time I'd said them. "I love you too," Jake replied. "Always and forever." As we sat there together in our living room, surrounded by the evidence of the life we'd built, family photos on the walls, children's artwork on the refrigerator, toys scattered across the floor, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the journey that had brought us to this moment. 8 years ago, I had been living a lie, terrified of my own feelings, convinced that I could never have the kind of love and family I secretly dreamed of. I had been so scared of being rejected, of being different, of disappointing the people I cared about, that I had been willing to spend my entire life pretending to be someone I wasn't. But then Jake had seen through my carefully constructed facade. He had recognized something in me that I hadn't been able to see in myself, and he had loved me enough to wait while I found the courage to be honest about who I really was. The process of coming out, of accepting myself, of building a life based on authenticity rather than fear, had been one of the most difficult and rewarding experiences of my life. It had required me to be braver than I'd ever thought possible, to risk everything I thought I knew about myself and my future. But every difficult moment had been worth it to get to this place of peace and joy and love. Every awkward conversation, every relationship that had been strained or lost, every moment of fear and uncertainty had been part of the journey that had led me to Jake, to our children, to this beautiful, messy, perfect life we'd created together. "Thank you," I said suddenly. "For what?" Jake asked. "For seeing me before I could see myself." for being patient while I figured out who I was, for loving me enough to wait for me to catch up. Jake's eyes filled with tears. Thank you for being brave enough to tell me the truth. Thank you for choosing love over fear, authenticity over comfort. Thank you for building this life with me. We held each other there on our couch, in our house, surrounded by our sleeping children and the evidence of our love. And I thought about how far we'd come from that scared, confused person I'd been just 8 years ago. I thought about all the people who had supported us along the way. Marcus, who had accepted our relationship with grace and humor. Our parents, who had welcomed us both into their families with open arms. Our friends, who had celebrated our love and stood by us through every milestone. The LGBTQ+ community, which had shown us what it looked like to live with pride and authenticity. I thought about all the people we'd been able to help along the way. The teenagers at the youth center who had found courage in our story, Tyler and Alex, who had built their own beautiful love story partly inspired by ours. Our own children, who were growing up knowing that love came in many forms and that being different was something to celebrate rather than hide. Most of all, I thought about the power of truth, of authenticity, of having the courage to be exactly who you are even when it's scary. My journey to self-acceptance had been long and sometimes painful, but it had also been the most important thing I'd ever done. It had given me everything I'd ever dreamed of and more: love, family, purpose, joy. I wouldn't change anything, I said to Jake as we finally headed upstairs to bed. Not the confusion, not the fear, not the difficult conversations. It all led us here. I wouldn't change anything either, Jake said, taking my hand as we climbed the stairs. Even the hard parts were worth it. We checked on our children before going to our own room. Gabriel sprawled across his bed with his favorite stuffed animal, Sophia curled up in a tiny ball with her thumb in her mouth. They looked so peaceful, so secure, so loved. They're never going to have to hide who they are, I said softly, watching them sleep. Never, Jake agreed. They're going to grow up knowing they're perfect exactly as they are. As we got ready for bed, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror and was struck, as I often was, by how different I looked now compared to 8 years ago. Not just older, though I was that too, but more settled, more confident, more authentically myself. The fear that had once dominated my life was gone, replaced by a deep sense of peace and purpose. The constant anxiety of maintaining a false identity had been replaced by the joy of living honestly. The loneliness of keeping such a fundamental part of myself hidden had been replaced by the warmth of being completely known and loved. What are you thinking about? Jake asked, noticing my contemplative mood. Just how happy I am, I said. How grateful I am for everything we have. Even when Sophia wakes us up at 5 in the morning because she had a bad dream? Jake asked teasingly. Especially then, I said. Because that means we get to comfort her. We get to be the safe place she runs to when she's scared. Jake smiled and pulled me into his arms. I love the way you see the world now. You find joy in everything, even the challenging parts. I learned that from you, I said. You taught me that love makes everything better, even the hard stuff. We taught each other, Jake corrected. That's what partners do. As we settled into bed, I thought about all the anniversaries still ahead of us. All the milestones we had yet to celebrate, all the adventures we had yet to share. Our children would grow up and become their own people, with their own dreams and challenges and triumphs. We would grow older together, supporting each other through whatever life brought our way. But no matter what the future held, I knew that the foundation we'd built, love, honesty, authenticity, courage, would carry us through. We had learned that the truth, no matter how scary it might be at first, was always worth telling. We had learned that being different wasn't something to hide from, but something to celebrate. We had learned that love really was love, in all its beautiful, complicated, wonderful forms. Jake, I said as we turned off the lights. Yeah, I love our life. I love our life too, he said, pulling me closer. All of it. The messy parts, the beautiful parts, the ordinary parts, the extraordinary parts. Here's to many more years of all of it, I said. Here's to always telling each other the truth, Jake replied. Even when it's scary? I asked. echoing a conversation we'd had so many times over the years. Especially when it's scary, Jake said, and kissed me goodnight. As I drifted off to sleep in my husband's arms, in our house, with our children safe in their beds down the hall, I thought about that terrified person I'd been 8 years ago, standing on a rooftop with Jake, too scared to admit what I was feeling. If I could go back to that moment, I would tell him not to be afraid. I would tell him that the truth he was so scared to speak would set him free in ways he couldn't imagine. I would tell him that love was waiting for him on the other side of fear, that family was waiting, that a life beyond his wildest dreams was waiting. But most of all, I would tell him what I had learned through this incredible journey of self-discovery and love, that being authentic, being true to yourself, being brave enough to live honestly, was the greatest gift you could give yourself and everyone who loved you. I had spent years lying to everyone, including myself, about who I was. But I couldn't lie to Jake anymore, and that honesty had changed everything. It had given me love, family, purpose, joy. It had given me a life worth living, a story worth telling, a legacy worth leaving for my children. The truth had set me free, and I had never looked back.